you have your own access to this website that I'm showing simply by searching for benigno.xyz in any of your browsers. And that way you will have control of scrolling your own text, etc. I'd like to show you some new things for today. This letter I wrote with every intention that you would have access to it, and you didn't yesterday. It was helpful to some friends who got to it before we moved into the breakout rooms. You may want to take a look at it if you want to feel a little more in tune with a sense of what a small group in this context might be. Down in every footer, you will have three links. One is something you can use to send questions or comments to the presenters and the elders. And please send them by 3 p.m. so that my elders and I can discuss them and discern which comments and questions contribute or need to be addressed for the benefit of the intensifying the message. There's also a link for reaching pastoral care coordinator in case you should need to do that in a confidential manner. The third link in there is active at 12 p.m. for a conversation with me in Spanish. You can enter into Tuesday through this button. And the first thing I want to do is ask for forgiveness. I feel very blessed, very blessed by the water that the Spirit has been sending us. And therefore, it's somewhat painful to recognize that yesterday, that water was not reasonably distributed. It was put out there in a hard to open container. I tell you what the Spirit has sent me. I had a very Cuban dream last night. I was a little boy and I was given a coconut, and I knew that there was a sweet mess of water in there, but I had no way of opening. That dream was a substantial admonition for what happened yesterday in terms of not having access to the materials or the directions, etc. We will move into breakout rooms where I am asking you, inviting you to continue in the manner of worship and just to tell each other what's in your heart, what's been raked up by the readings, what you can, from that you can give each other accompaniment in processing what the Spirit may be sending us. I also have to ask for forgiveness for packing too much and not telling you that you will not be failed if you don't read everything. I'm not grading you. Nobody is. I'm also ask for forgiveness because I know that I will continue to blow it with the best of intentions. Today, the most important thing we're going to do is this first two items here, the Dance for Two, scenes from a ministry, and a Jolt of Hope, the Deuteronomy. But I'm not going to do that first. I want to go through Exodus 1:1 to 4:17 very fast so I can get to that endpoint for today. whenever you open the Hebrew Bible in post-Christian times, the first territorial acknowledgement that you have to do is that you are living in somebody else's land, in somebody else's text. And yet, what you hear has come to you in translation, by tradition, by imposition, by a combination of blessings and abuse. The Bible is as much ours as it is not. And that's the tightrope that we walk in here. When I translate, I work with Susan Ferry about 10 hours a week. We spend about 10 hours a week in the company of early friends, and we make them speak in Spanish. And Susan Ferry has written a very important book about what Christians ought to know about Judaism. And one of the first things that I learned from Susan is that Christians have been awful about using Hebrew texts to dump on the Jews. We cannot do that. And we may fall into it. We have to be ready to ask for forgiveness for it as soon as we get caught at it. If you open the link to Exodus 1:1-4, you're going to get the whole early story of Moses. It starts with a demographic development. When I read now, these are the names, etc., and when I read in 1:7, I read, but the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiply and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. I think of demographics. I think of settler colonialism. I think of migrant labor. I think of myself as an immigrant. And all those conditions have to do with my reading of that verse. And I won't tell you what it means, because that could speak to your condition in a very different way. Notice in 8 that the political situation changes, and the welcome Israelites become enslaved and a problem. And then I want to make the first stop in 15. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew woman and see them on the birth stool, if it's a son, then you should kill him. And if it's a daughter, then she shall live. This is a genocidal order, clear and simple. By the way, on a lighter note, Shiphrah and Puah were beloved cats of Susan Ferry, with whom I translated for a long, long time. And in terms of the history of translation, in 1590-something, the Calvinists published the Geneva Bible in English. And one of the interesting things about the Geneva Bible in English is that it has footnotes. It has a lot of footnotes. And the footnote to this verse said something along the lines that, these midwives did the right thing, because sometimes the law of God is higher than the law of men. Guess what? That footnote and others like it were not to the liking of King James. And just to get that Bible out of circulation was one of the rationales for calling his team of translators and coming up with this great project of doing the King James Bible. So think of that. Footnotes can get in the way of kings. Midwives speak to me particularly in the context of bringing out messages. Midwives speak to me because the Spirit gets us pregnant. The Spirit inside us gets a life. And if we let it live, it is born. And when it wants to come out as ministry, it's useful to have midwives. It's useful to have a monthly meeting to help you birth what the Spirit wants to conceive and bring out from you. And here I know how important midwives can be in the survival of a child who will become a minister. I could keep talking about this, and we may come back and talk about the growth of Moses and his escape into Midian and his marriage and his call, and we will do some of that. But I actually need to jump way ahead already. I already mentioned the birth of the minister, right, and the preparation that he's going to be going through. And now I want to go, because of the time, I want to go back and I want to open up Exodus 34. In this first short passage, that's the first time, that's very close to when God and Moses meet. And I want you to notice how adolescent this God is. He's introduced to this guy that he's going to want to use as a minister. And he says, well, now the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. He can't help it. Nobody else can talk for God, right? So he's actually saying what he is to Moses. And the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. Quakers liked it that far. And then when I came into the blessed assemblies of friends, I came in through a very universalist, modernist, post-enlightenment door of Quakerism, and I was given permission to dismiss the Bible and to take things like what follows with a very judgmental, dismissive air. And by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. And I was upset by that. And I was dismissive of that kind of a God until I learned about systemic oppression. Until I learned to what extent systemic oppression is inherited and until I learn to what extent there is iniquity that just gets handed down from generation to generation without any one of us ever really paying attention, or any one of us making too much of an effort to liberate ourselves from that iniquity. So that text, for me, has come back as an active thing to think about in the context of oppression. What follows here in Numbers 14:11 comes much later. And I hope you have read it. We don't have time to read it out loud. I hope you have read it because this is a place, one of the very first places in the Bible where God gets eldered. And God gets eldered by his minister. And it is a lesson to all of us. And the Spirit speaks to me. The Spirit speaks to me saying, what kind of relationship do you have with the Spirit that makes you minister? What kind of relationship do you have with the God that loves you into the work? Can you talk back to the Spirit that moves you? Here, Moses is absolutely dead on, reminding God of how God himself defined himself as very early on in their relationship. Now you say, and it's also one of the funniest parts of the Bible. By the way, those midwives start a string of trickster moments in the story. Cheeky little things that happen. This is a huge cheeky thing that Moses does because God is upset and God is saying, let's clear them out. And Moses says, that's not going to look very good back in Egypt. When they found out that you took them out just to wipe them out here, that's going to mess up the optics of your moves. And then Moses does one of the very important things that we can do. Moses heard once God making a covenant, God defining himself. And Moses here can say, you told me that you were merciful, all forgiving, etc., etc. And why don't you try going back to that? And God knew that Moses was right. We have to go into our small rooms. Again, I could waste a lot of time asking for more forgiveness for not being able to talk about all the things I asked you to read. But let your small church, let your little meeting give you the context and the accompaniment where you perhaps, where you for sure will be given what through these texts speaks to your condition. There are queries today. And my first advice about the queries that you will see on the Tuesday page, right here under the readings, is that if you have your own moves, your own stirrings from the spirit, go with that first. And only if you haven't been needled into anything in particular should you mess with the queries and see where they take you. Do it in the safety and in the love and in the company of the friends you've been given today for today's exploration of how the spirit that gave this forth is speaking to your condition.